My name is Joe Standard, and this is Module 9 case study for AEP 855. Real quick, a little bit about what has occurred in this case. At school, there's this kid named James. He has had discipline issues in the past, and he has been seen by a teacher handing this other student, who's an honor student, uh, possibly drugs. They didn't know at the time what it was. The students were called into the principal's office by the police officer. This is something that the principal later would regret. When David showed up, he was visibly shaken, but James remained calm. James states that he just gave him something for David to hold on to. The police officer winds up checking David's bag and he finds a pair of brass knuckles. James claims that they were his and threatened David to hold on to them. Then the police officer arrests both boys and they are taken to jail and charged with a felony. The principal feels remorse for David since David is one of those students that he is an honor student. He's involved in a lot of things, and really he was forced into doing this. Uh, the principal does call David's mom. She is very emotional over the situation. David's mom comes into the principal's office because she's unable to speak on the phone because of her anger and sadness. So she does go into the principal's office. She's wondering how this could have happened to her kid. She didn't even know anything about this zero tolerance policy. The principal is at a loss for words. He understands that the system is broken because along with the arrest, there is a 45-day suspension or expulsion, um, and and he doesn't think that that is right. The principal doesn't, so he knows that this system is broken and it is hurting a student who is of good standing. So the principal refuses to fill out the expulsionary papers because David was bullied into holding the brass knuckles, and David has no prior disciplinary issues. But the problem with that is a week later, the director of secondary education tells the principal to fill out the form for David or receive a reprimand on his personal file. And that's kind of where this case left off at. So, some legal and ethical issues that arise through this case study. First off, David's future is being ruined because he was bullied into holding the brass knuckles. It wasn't really his fault. It's either get beat up or hold on to the knuckles. He really didn't have much of a choice in that situation. Um, so it feels like we are we're like punishing those that are getting bullied. So that becomes an ethical issue. The zero tolerance policy is harming David, even though James confessed. So, and the policy is also harming David's family. His mother is very upset and hysterical. Principal's ethics and professional life are also being threatened, both internally and externally, because he is having to fight over whether or not to fill out the form or fill out the form. Because if he decides not to fill out the form, it goes on his personal record. And if he does, he knows that he is harming this student. Continuing with legal and ethical issues, the morality of the situation is contravening the zero tolerance policy. The zero tolerance policy is what it is. It's zero tolerance. There's no wiggle room for anything when there's zero tolerance. There was a breach of contract because the principal is going to have a referral on his personal file. And the actions were discriminatory because David is being treated the same as James, even though David was bullied. We're discriminating against the bullied. We're setting up that system where, you know, we're punishing those that are being forced into doing something that is wrong. So, what exactly happened? Well, in plain terms, David is being wrongfully punished because of zero tolerance. That is the main focus here, the zero tolerance policy. So, a few known and unknown facts about the people. Well, we have Richard. He's the principal. He tries to make connections with Southside students because those are the students that come from rough neighborhoods, and he's from that area, and he wants to make that connection so those students have a better life. James is the offending student. He's a 15-year-old heavyset kid. He's got tattoos. he's had it pretty rough. And Richard has built this relationship with James through basketball and conversations. He's seen a real improvement out of him up until this situation. And I think that kind of goes towards him confessing of what he did. David, he's an honor student. He's involved in band. He's your stereotypical, perfect kid that you want to have in your class. He is the one that was bullied into holding on to the brass knuckles. We also have James and David's teacher who witnessed the sketchy transaction. They didn't know whether or not it was drugs or something of that matter. A police officer was involved. The principal called the police officer because it's part of policy, whether it's drugs or weapons or anything, of what they were going through and everything. So he calls the police officer. We have James' mom. James' mom really doesn't care as much about what happens to James. She feels like, hey, let him rot in jail. And she really had nothing much to say when he was expelled, too. Then you have David's mom. She took it very hard when she found out what happened, so much so that she was hysterical. She couldn't talk over the phone, so she winds up going to the principal's office to talk to him. The principal didn't know exactly what to tell her either because he knows that the system is broken. You also have the director of secondary education. He's the one that is telling Richard that he must fill out that form because it is district policy. Some unknowns that kind of come up here. Race, not really sure like what race is involved here, um, because depending on race depends on how this policy came about. Because usually zero tolerance policy a lot of times affects minority groups a lot. Don't know other administrators that were involved. This seems like a situation that needed maybe multiple administrators there, especially with such a huge population of students. You would think there would be a lot more administrators there. Also, superintendent, don't know the involvement of the superintendent and what their thoughts are on the situation. It'd be nice to get kind of little background information on that as well. The place, know that it's Rockert Junior High. There are 900 students there. They bus in Southside students daily. So I am to assume, based off of the amount of students and the busing, that this is an urban school. They also have a disciplinary alternative education program. Um, this is where students go when they've been expelled from regular school and they have to spend their 45 days there. And I know about the jail, about the students going there as well. Some unknowns. I'm unsure about the complete demographics. I don't know what the wealth gap is. I'm unsure of the makeup of the student population. These would be some good things to kind of know and understand so we can understand the community a lot better. The town, I don't know where this is geographically. No information was given for that. Location in the town, is it on, is this the center of town? Is this in a lesser, area that has higher crime rates and poverty? I'm just unsure of that. The conditioning of the school, is the school up to code? Is it a new school? Is it a school that, is run down? These are information that would be really kind of come in handy to give me better mindset. Also, the culture of the school. Is this, one of those schools that practices, restorative justice, or is this a strict school based off the zero tolerance? I'm to assume maybe it's a strict school, but I'm unsure what the culture says because it seems like the principal is wanting to have a certain culture, but the district has a different view of it. I'm just unsure what the culture is of the school. So some known and unknown facts about the program there. I know that they have a zero tolerance policy. I know this is a middle school. I know it serves honors classes because of David's case. I know this is a public school. I know they offer band. I know they have the DAEP. Okay. Some unknowns. I'm unsure of whether or not they have a special education program, if they have other restorative penalties besides just the zero tolerance policy. And I'm unsure of the curriculum that is fully offered here at the school. So some stakeholders that are involved here. I know David's mom. She's pretty upset. She could possibly wind up taking David out of this school and he can go to another school since he is a student, with relatively good standing. So taking him out of there could have a really bad effect on the school culture, and it'll drastically affect stakeholders. Other stakeholders involved, well, you have the other stakeholders, you have the community. They might see that, the bullied are being punished, and it's an unsafe place, so they're not going to support the school as much. Um, Also, what can another stakeholder is the principal. Their standing within the community can be diminished. If they see him as someone who's just a rubber stamper, or even somebody who's a yes man, instead of somebody who is standing up for students and student rights, and standing up for what they know is right for the students. And another people group that gets you know stakeholders that are also affected. All students, principals, and parents have a stake in this outcome. Whether or not this situation gets resolved or a change happens or not. All of them have a stake in this, because this is a school within the community that the community relies on for their students. Some stakeholders, the mother, so some of the stakeholders were contacted. The mothers were both contacted. David's mom was consulted with, but I felt like the superintendent needed to be consulted with as well, because this seems like a major dilemma for the principal. I know this is kind of questioning his morals and ethics, but I think this is something that needs to get a superintendent involved as well. I believe that more can be learned, and I believe that the policy needs to be changed. And I also want to know, how can the principal help David more if he fills out the form? I'm really curious of how he's going to do what he can to make sure that David is taken care of, even if he fills out the form and he's suspended for 45 days. I believe that enough information has been acquired to make a decision, however. So here are some possible options that I came up with. First, I can choose not to fill out the form. Just be rebellious, don't fill it out. Um, but the consequence of that is there's going to be a reprimand on the file, and possibly release too, because being very flippant about it. Could just fill out the form, but then David's expelled 45 days, and he could be removed from honors classes, and his life could turn out bad, can turn out a lot different, because this kid has opportunities, and just to snub those out, not really a good benefit for him. Or I could fill out the form and do what I can to help David. David's still going to be expelled for the 45 days, but as a principal, I might not have as much sway as I want to have, though, too. Could be a downside to that. Or I can decide to go to the board with community support and plead David's case and try to get the zero tolerance policy removed. Downside to that is community might not care, and the board might be unswayable. So here are some pros and cons. Well, pros are, if I don't fill out the form, does David really escape expulsion? Because somebody else can just fill out the form then. It doesn't just have to be me on there. So I don't think he's really escaping the expulsion still, and I'm left with a reprimand. If I fill out the form, there's no reprimand in the file, and I follow the district policies. It is what it is. If I fill out the form and help David, might be able to keep him in his honors classes, and there's no reprimand on my file. Getting the community to support, getting rid of zero tolerance and also helping David. Well, the zero tolerance policy is changed, and David is not expelled, and I gain stakeholder support. I get more into the community. So some cons: not filling out the report. There'll be a reprimand in my file, and David is still expelled. So really, not much has changed on that. For filling out the form, David still gets expelled and sent to DAEP, and zero tolerance policy continues. If I help David and fill out the form, David still gets expelled and sent to DAEP, but zero tolerance policy still continues. It's just a continuation of it. So not much is still changing. But if I were to get the community support and get the zero tolerance policy changed, it might not be changed. David is still expelled, and I don't get any support from the stakeholders. and there's possibly going to be a principal vacancy because either the district's going to be upset with me, or maybe I find that maybe I can't run the school the way that I feel like I should be able to, so I might want to look for someplace else. And that's pretty sad considering the you know the history that he has within the community. So the best option that I thought was I should fill out the form still because that is policy, but I need to go to the board with community support and plead David's case and try to get the zero tolerance policy removed. Because it's not just David this affects many students. And I need to be aware that, there are a lot of Davids out there. And I need to be able to stand up not just for one student, but for all students. I know that to do this, I need to communicate decisions with David's mom, getting her on board, letting her understand what is being done for her son. I also need to gather community support to go to the board about changing the zero tolerance policy. It's a lot of working parts here. So to implement this, so for the path, first I need to fill out the form, contact David and his mom. I need to research the effects of zero tolerance policy. I need to have data to back up what I am saying, because if I don't, I'm just going in there with just opinions, and I need to be able to support what I'm trying to say. I need to research effects of zero tolerance policy. As I've said, I need to send out research to the community members and hold open discussions about changing the policy. I need to inform them. I need to get that support. I need to get parents on board. I need to gather enough support to go to the board and plead the case. So here are some things that might happen. So on the positive side, the community could wind up supporting the idea and the board changes the policy and David does not serve his 45 days. That would be the perfect scenario. But other things that might happen, community support is minimal and or the board just does not change the policy. So who needs to know about this implementation? The superintendent, definitely, David and his mother, community members need to know, and board members. We all need to be informed so we can make this change. Uh, can I deal with this on my own? No, I can't. This has to take more than just me at this point. I have to get others involved. I need David and his mom on my side. I need the support of the community. I need support of the board and the superintendent. It's going to take a lot of working parts to get this change. Okay, to warn, not threaten. I actually need to warn David and his mom, that they need to be prepared for what will happen if this does not work. What's the next plan? What's the next step? What can we do? I need to warn the community about what might happen if decision is in the negative. Do we want to continue? Do we want to bring it up again? What's our next course of action? That's what we need to keep in mind when we are challenging this. The plan B, what I can do if this doesn't work, I can work with David and his mom to ensure that David is involved in honors classes and work with David to ensure that he continues on the right path. And try again. This is something that is important. So this is something that needs to be brought up constantly to get that support to make this change, because zero tolerance policy has been shown not to work. Okay, so some standard components that I hit on for this case study. Candidate understands ethical and legal decision making. So the policy was followed, but decision was made that the zero tolerance policy was unethical. I went through the process of ethical decision making, putting myself in the student's shoes and thought about the consequences of the decision. I made sure to go through that ethical decision making process. The building administrator demonstrates the capacity to evaluate the ethical dimensions of issues, analyze decisions in terms of established ethical frameworks, or communicate about and advocate for ethical and legal decisions. I went through the process of ethical decision making. I put myself in the student's shoes and thought about the consequences of the decision. So it kind of goes back to that component number one. For standard component number three, the building administrator models ethical behavior in their personal conduct and relationships and cultivates ethical behaviors in others. Well, I followed procedures, though I disagreed with it. I advocated for change in the policy. I stayed true to my moral compass, and I demonstrated to all students and stakeholders the democratic way to bring about change. And the final component, candidate uses his or her comprehensive understanding and capacity to undertake and implement this work within a school setting. I'm working within the system to make a positive changes. All right, thank you for watching my presentation and have a wonderful day.